Police practices in Baltimore are set to undergo a major facelift. City officials in the U.S. Department of Justice have reached a critical consent decree agreement. The 227-page agreement outlines methods to ensure better relations between the community and police, including better supervision of officers and training.
The three main issues that emerged from our discussions, from our negotiations, from all of our time in Baltimore. First, to assure effective and constitutional policing. Second, to restore the community's trust in law enforcement. And finally, to advance public and officer safety. It will require sustained efforts from all parties, to mend, to strengthen, to solidify the trust between law enforcement and the community, because that trust is the bedrock of Baltimore's public safety.
Several Baltimore officials voiced their optimism about the new legislation.
I believe that this document represents the citizens of Baltimore well. If I didn't, I wouldn't be standing here.
I have no doubt that when we eventually emerge from this consent decree, we will be better crime fighters and we will have greater, more respectful, trustful relationships with our community.
This is a gift, hopefully, that will keep on giving for years and years and years, because it gives our young people and so many others in our city and our police department an opportunity to work together.
Joining from Des Moines, Iowa, to weigh in on this consent decree is Reddit Hudson, co-founder of the National Coalition of Law Enforcement Officers for Justice Reform and Accountability. Reddit, how important are these consent decrees that we have seen now with Baltimore, but also in Cleveland? We've seen this in other cities as well.
They're critical. I mean, given the reality that we've rarely seen a police department, particularly in large cities, hold itself accountable for changing its culture, for providing constitutional policing and other things that we would expect as citizens from police. They're critical. I'm concerned now, of course, with the nomination of Jeff Sessions as the AG and some of his statements on the record that he thinks consent decrees are coercive tools used by the federal government against police departments around the country. How effective this consent decree is going to be over time should he be confirmed.
And when you talk about these consent decrees, I mean, at the end of the day, what it means is holding police accountable and forcing them to do their job a different way.
Absolutely, Roland. You know, that's everything in the equation. Accountability. I've seen some of the things that this consent decree calls for, and they're all good. Community-oriented policing, a de-emphasis on contact with juveniles and other things, but you absolutely have to have that accountability piece in there. Otherwise, you build in a dilution of the consent decree at the onset. So, for example, when Joe Crystal, a former Baltimore police officer, a few years back, turned in some of his fellow officers in Baltimore for using excessive force against the subject, and then they started putting dead rats on his patrol car, among other things, and he had to leave the department. That culture has been pervasive, and there's been a long history in Baltimore and other places of that kind of thing going on. So you hope that they can sustain it. You hope that they are invested in it. I'm encouraged by the fact that I think I've heard that a number of officers there are behind it, and I think you see a growing trend of particularly officers of color and from marginalized communities waking up to the reality that we have to change this culture and we have to make sure that our people are treated fairly.
All right, Reddit, we appreciate it, man. Thank you so very much for joining us.
All right.
Faraja, you're from Baltimore. Your thoughts on this consent decree?
I think it's a good start. I mean, I think essentially it really does bring some level of accountability to both the officers as well as to restoring the public trust. But I also think that, you know, there's been a lot of conversation with the FOP in Baltimore stating that they weren't a part of the conversation, that they weren't at the table. And I'm not really worried about the FOP, considering the fact that they've always...
They wouldn't want this.
No, exactly. They have unwavered support in spite of the truth of police officer actions. They have always wanted they always wanted to you know, they always want to try to hold and to try to make this about them. So I think it's a good start.
Yeah, I mean, I sat across from the head of the FOP in a meeting with President Obama where he said that all this talk about racial profiling and discrimination was new to him. That was a couple of months ago. The head of the National Fraternal Order of Police. So the challenge, though, that we have is that we actually have an auxiliary of the FOP that's going to be our Attorney General. And consent decrees are only as strong as their enforcement. And they mean nothing if they are not funded and enforced and followed up on. And the problems that we will have with some of these policies, some of these changes and executive orders that are coming out is that they will not be funded and they will not be enforced.
I got about 1 minute left, 30 seconds each. Angela, Brandon.
Well,
Angela?
Just to build off of Shot's, this is also why I was the thing that was most appalling for me during the Sessions confirmation hearing is just the real sort of weak posture that I see from Democrats, as if Jeff Sessions is not being a very documented racist and misogynist, being affirmed for one of the top layers of our country. I think that it's a devastating situation that's going to have huge consequences, and I don't see the urgency that we need from our Democratic leadership.
That I support this consent decree. I work in Baltimore. I used to live in Baltimore. I go to school, to law school in Baltimore. But one thing I want to point out is that there are over 4,000 law enforcement agencies in this country. And I think that we are focusing our energy on the federal government to come in and write 4,000 consent decrees. We need to mobilize on a local level in these cities across the country, in Chicago, and Baltimore, and New York, and New Orleans, and put pressure on our local officials, as well as the federal government, but also on the local officials who control the police department. No, I know. Hold on, I'm saying they're the one. Oh my God, you can only do that. They control the local government.
I'm only going to give you facts.
Yes.
The Chicago consent decree will likely be announced next week.
No, I know.
Yeah. I'm not done. New Orleans Mayor Mitch Landrieu, when he came into office, he called in the federal government. That's what local officials have done. In Philadelphia, the mayor and the police chief called in the federal government. So when you say that, it sounds great mobilizing locally, but here's the reality. If the police departments were doing their job, there's no need to be for the federal government to be called in. I understand that. But what I'm trying to explain to you is, Brandon, local mobilization is what caused the federal government to come in.
That's how we got
But we can't do 4,000 consent decrees.
Well, guess what?
Can we?
If you don't do your job, yes. If you hold up, if the cops don't do their job, yes, we can.
Kickstart your day at 7 and get the news you need from the perspective you want. NewsOne Now with Roland Martin. Every weekday morning at 7 on TV1.